Well, now that Tom's given my talk, I'll just move to question and answer. So I don't know where that line about one of the top 10 in the country, that is not from me, Tom, and that is not accurate. So if I can force that down a little. All right. Can you hear me okay? All right. So before I get started, I want to thank Tom for this opportunity to speak. I know he's been doing these monthly seminars for years, and he always brings in some great speakers. Tonight, one of those great speakers fell through, and so he asked me to come and speak. And so we'll just see how this goes. Tom did mention a lot of things that he might have wanted me to speak about in this presentation. I'm actually not going to, because I've talked about those a bit in other presentations. You can find other presentations I've done on YouTube if you just Google my name, Oak Norton. I'll have this presentation online before the end of the weekend, so if you want to search YouTube for this presentation title with my name, you should be able to find it, assuming you actually want to share it with somebody. So at the end of my presentation, I do have a very special gift for somebody to take home. To win it, and it's a copy of Ron Paul's book, The School Revolution. All you have to do is take good notes and write down all the anti-politically correct statements that I make. And whoever has the most takes the book home. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. All right. When you go to a store and you want to buy something, you see a product you want to purchase. What are the things that you might consider when you want to purchase that item? How do you evaluate it? You might consider the color of the item, the style, the quality that went into it, the brand, maybe social media reviews, all those kinds of things. But these are all subjective values that you assign to that thing, right? Is anything in life really of objective value that everybody would agree on? I mean, even eternal life that a lot of us put a high value on, some people don't care at all about. So how do we assess something in life and say there's an objective value that everybody assigns to this thing that's equal to what everybody else assigns to it? We really can't. And it's the same with the value of your child's education. Everybody looks at education differently. Every child looks at it differently. It's all a subjective valuation of what you feel you're getting out of that education system that you're participating in. And most likely, none of us are ever going to have the influence and the ability to overly dictate what our children are learning unless we really go to some extremes. So free and compulsory education, which we have across the country, denies you and your children basic rights in education in evaluating the value that you assign to it. So tonight what I want to do is explore a few topics: the anti-freedom movement, state and corporate power, the national education agenda, the principle of freedom, and education options that are available to you. So, how many of you feel like we're living in the end times? Okay, all you have to do is look at the presidential election, and if you're on the fence, maybe that'll tip you over. I have a number of critics who hate when I bring up religious things, so I thought I'd lead off with that, just to give them something to start their notes early with. So if you're not religious, just hang on for a minute. Now, I'm not any expert on the beasts in Revelation. I don't know many that are, but what I do want to do is just talk about a few really basic things about them. So in Revelation chapter 13, we read about this beast that gets power from the devil. And it's got 7 heads and authority from the devil. And then a second beast arises that causes the people to worship the first beast and creates an image for the beast. And we're told that this second beast causes everyone to have a mark in their hand or forehead, and also that no one can buy or sell unless they have this mark. I've read a few commentaries on the book of Revelation, and one of my favorites is by Farley Anderson. Some of you may know he's run for governor on the Independent Party. And he makes a strong case that the beast is communism and the image of the beast is socialism. So I encourage you to read his book and give that some thought. But Another commentary by Richard Draper mentions that symbolically the hand is tied to labor. It's what we do. And the forehead would be tied to the mind, or what we think. So an indication that one of the things that the beast is trying to do is control the workforce, and independent thinking could be implied by this. Then we also read that the beast controls the economy. Nobody can buy or sell. And so we might look at that and say, there's some real monopoly power, and there must be some kind of power tied between government and corporations. And if you don't worship the beast, lovely, you're put to death. So basically, we could look at this as totalitarianism in one sense. Okay, now for the LDS population, which probably most of you are, you're familiar with these verses from the Book of Mormon, ancient American Testament of Christ. In Ether 8, the prophet Moroni gives this stern warning to a Latter-day people about something he refers to as secret combinations. He says, "Whatsoever nation shall uphold such secret combinations to get power and gain, till they spread over the nation, behold, they shall be destroyed. For whoso buildeth it up seeketh to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries. And it bringeth to pass the destruction of all people, for it is built up by the devil, who is the father of all lies." Sounds a lot like the beast in Revelation 13. Now imagine, if you will, a global force rising in power and authority to enact laws and penalties on the populace in order to obtain power and money, with the goal of removing freedom, and have full control of the economic powers of the world, causing everyone to worship it. And imagine this conglomeration, this beast, saying, hey, you know what? It's no problem if you want to teach your kids the Constitution. It's no big deal. You want to educate them in the principles of freedom. We don't care about that. If you want your kids to be good and religious, we don't mind. We're not interested in the rising generation. Can anyone imagine a totalitarian government having that approach to education? I can't. There's no way that totalitarian government will allow for individual self-government and responsibility under the U.S. Constitution. I mean, the beast puts to death anyone who won't worship it. So how are, the hearts and minds of our children are first and foremost in that environment. So what path would the beast take to gain the hearts and minds of children? Get them to reject morality and their parents' faith. Get them to reject our founding fathers as rich white guys that just exploited others to get power, so they're no better than anybody else. Get children to reject freedom as an antiquated philosophy. It seems to me that that's the path such a beast would take. Replace moral values with moral relativity, and replace the founding fathers and the Constitution with socialism and Karl Marx. Neal Maxwell was an LDS apostle, as most of you here know. He said, "It is no accident that the lessening or loss of belief in certain absolute truths, such as the existence of God and the reality of immortality, has occurred at the same time there's been a sharp gain in the size and power of governments in many portions of the world." Of course, many people say, well, our schools are led by good people who won't let that kind of stuff come into our system. And it's true, there's a ton of good people in our education system. But what power do they have over the federal government? Or at least, what are they doing, what power are they exercising to stop it? And won't some of the elect actually be deceived and embrace destructive policies? Many of you are familiar with some of the people involved in education and their agenda, so I'm only going to mention a few for background purposes tonight. I've talked about some of these people more extensively in other presentations. But I'm going to start with this little book that you can read in one sitting. It's called The Leipzig Connection. It's a little paperback, only 100 pages long, and a friend of mine, Dennis Lisenby, recommended it to me years ago, and it's a must-read in my mind to understand the origins of our modern education system. The story begins at the University of Leipzig, Germany, with Wilhelm Maximilian Wundt. I don't know how to say German names. Wundt. As professor of philosophy and later psychology. This university is the same place that Pavlov was training his dogs and B.F. Skinner was doing behavioral experiments, just so you have a framework for what was going on at this school. G. Stanley Hall went over from America to be trained here, and after his return to America was chosen to become the president of Clark University in Massachusetts. Hall founded the American Psychological Association and brought experimental psychology to child education. John Dewey later attended Clark University, where G. Stanley Hall was his mentor. Wundt's theory of education was that man is devoid of spirit. Man is it. And as a result, self-determination is all there is. And he set out to prove that man was the sum of his experiences. There was nothing else to an individual. And without a belief in a spirit within man, it's natural to think that the stimulus-response system might be used to create the values and behaviors of individuals that were desirable to a certain segment of society. So the question is, who decides what values and behaviors are desirable? This was a group of psychologists, child psychologists, that were working on value and behavior modification under a godless philosophy. So Hall operated under the idea that children are not capable of agency or free will, so they have to be preconditioned through behavioral sciences. And Dewey's goal became the socialization of children into democratic ideals that society was more important than the individual. So Dewey was also one of the original signers or signatories of the first Humanist Manifesto back in 1934, I believe was the year. And in a nutshell, that's the notion there is no God, and so man is supreme, which for the LDS audience is the Korihor doctrine. So this book goes on to describe in detail how some powerful men like Rockefeller and Carnegie created the idea of giving money with strings to schools. And they achieved some marvelous things in advancing their agendas by giving schools a certain sum of money, attaching requirements, and then watching as schools, grateful for the money, did basically whatever they asked that school to do in changing education. And now for those of you that have not seen some of the shocking quotes that have been circulated by these national people, they're not ashamed of what they say because they have a certain philosophy and belief that they stand by. So I'm going to share just a few of those with you right now. How many of you remember Benjamin Bloom from your school days? Psychologist, you've seen his hierarchy. Okay, he's an educational psychologist. Bloom said, a student attains higher order thinking when he no longer believes in right or wrong. A large part of what we call good teaching is a teacher's ability to obtain effective objectives by challenging the student's fixed beliefs. A large part of what we call teaching is that the teacher should be able to use education to reorganize a child's thoughts, attitudes, and feelings. So please remember this slide, okay? 3 things: eliminate right and wrong, challenge a student's fixed beliefs to make them relative, and reorganize the way a child thinks, believes, and feels. Another buzzword that's tossed around, you've probably heard it, it's associated with Common Core and everything in the education system, is critical thinking. Parents need to recognize it's the same agenda. Sounds good to us because we want our kids to be critical thinkers. We want them to be educated so that when they see something, they can evaluate it and say, okay, where's truth in this equation, and how do I line that up with what I'm being presented with, and weigh the evidence. But what these people in their agenda mean is entirely different. Chester Pierce, Harvard professor of education and psychiatry, in an address to the Childhood International Education Seminar, Childhood International Education Seminar, said, every child in America entering school at the age of 5 is insane because he comes to school with certain allegiances to our founding fathers, toward our elected officials, toward his parents, toward a belief in a supernatural being, and toward the sovereignty of this nation as a separate entity. It's up to you as teachers to make all these sick children well by creating the international child of the future. Wow. There's another list for you. Not one I guess anyone in this room probably wants to see enacted, but this is their definition of critical thinking. Get a child to think critically about his parents, about America's founders, national boundaries, culture. And since public schools cannot openly discuss God, critical thinking in the absence of God means everything has to be scientifically proven. It's faithless. So when the scriptures talk about seeking knowledge by study and by faith, there's no faith component. So if you can't experience it with one of the basic 5 senses, it's not real and provable. Therefore, faith is disproven and false. So how do you create an international child? Anyone ever heard about the need for our children to be educated to compete in a global economy? So it's one of the reasons we were told we needed to adopt Common Core. Weird how Common Core was never internationally benchmarked. We want international children? Well, why don't we compare us to Japan or Singapore's math standards? That wasn't done. Yet it's supposed to prepare all children to compete in a vast global economy by learning the exact same things at the same time. Conformity doesn't lead to diversity. So before I introduce the next character, I want to mention something about Charlotte Iserbyt. She's one of the heroes of education. She was brought in by Ronald Reagan as a senior policy advisor on education, and she went to work at the U.S. Department of Education and quickly saw that it was, in her words, a Marxist factory. She was extremely alarmed and began smuggling out documents, sort of like a Grisham novel. And she turned her documentation into a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. And it's for free on her website. You can see it right there, deliberatedumbingdown.com. If you go there, it's a 900-page PDF document. She's made it free. Get that. She also blogs regularly and has numerous videos on YouTube that you can watch. They're all great. She understands more about what's going on in American education than perhaps anybody. In her book, she details out, in particular, one of the agenda items that was being enacted at the Federal Department of Education, which was how to change children's values, attitudes, and beliefs. And she calls our next character America's premier change agent. So being a change agent is being able to effectively change children's values, attitudes, and beliefs. His name is John Goodlad. How many of you recognize this name? Okay, some of you. So, Tim Osborne used to be on the Alpine School Board, and 10 years ago when I was very involved in I'll just call it a math war with Alpine, because they'd quit teaching the times tables and long division to kids. One afternoon, Tim called me up and said, "Hey, you need to look up John Goodlad's name." And I was like, "Tim, I don't want something else to do. Just tell me who he is." And he's like, "Nope, look him up." And I was like, "Tim, just tell me what he is." And he's like, "Nope, you just need to look him up." And I was very frustrated, and I didn't want to do it because I was busy. I had things to do. And so I Googled him, and about 4 or 5 hours later, I had learned a lot. And what I immediately discovered was that Goodlad was the source of Alpine's motto that they'd emblazoned across the top of the teacher center in their teacher development building, wooden letters 40 feet long that said, "Enculturating the young into a social and political democracy." Came from Goodlad. So I just want to share a few quotes from America's premier change agent who provided that to Alpine. "Most youth still hold the same values of their parents. If we do not alter this pattern, if we don't re-socialize, our system will decay. Enlightened social engineering is required to face situations that demand global action now. Educators must resist the quest for certainty. If there were certainty, there would be no scientific advancement. So it is with morals and patriotism. Public education has served as a check on the power of parents, and this is another powerful reason for maintaining it." This gives you warm fuzzies, doesn't it? So among the things that Goodlad was promoting on his website during this time of research was that teachers, it was training for teachers in how to implement the social justice and gay agenda in classrooms. This is a screenshot of his website. At the bottom, you probably can't read it up here. It says, 2010 expert panel, GLBT students preparing future teachers to ensure equity. So that's what Goodlad was about. And this is what happens when people who do not believe in God, do not believe that man has a soul, do not believe in absolute truth, heavily influence our education system. If there's no belief in a soul or in God that created them, then equity isn't all men are created equal. It's man must make unjust circumstances fair and equitable. It's a natural extension of seeking to make meaning in life in the absence of a divine plan. There is no belief that a just God sent us to earth for the testing of our soul, and that different experiences are fair in the eternal scheme of things, and that God can fairly judge these things. There's only the belief that man has to embrace enlightened social engineering to change society. Today it's being pushed from the federal government, universities, schools of education, textbook publishers, assessment providers, and by too many teachers. Now, you remember a few minutes back when I said that even the elect may be deceived. Would it surprise you to learn that in 1983, John Goodlad was the BYU Education Department's advisor? In 1983, BYU invited him in to create the public school partnership with surrounding school districts. In 1986, 3 years later, Goodlad set up an organization he called the National Network for Educational Renewal. And he invited BYU to become one of the 11 inaugural member universities. BYU has been actively participating in his organization's annual conferences, even hosting one in 2006, bringing teachers and administrators to their site's Goodlad Training Center facility. And they have actually in their education department Goodlad posters, and there was a small obelisk out in front of their building. Somebody took a picture of and sent me a picture of it a few years back. Now, I don't know if those things are still there, but around 2010, we succeeded in getting BYU out of their affiliation with the NNER. And there was some weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth at BYU and their education department. One of the professors wrote up a very teary farewell to Goodlad, and they always say, well, we don't believe everything he espouses. He's just got so much, that we do, believe, and it's, to you and me it would be like, well, that's common sense. That is common sense. This is agenda. But when you're a university whose three letters are BYU, and you're known as a conservative Christian university, you're lending huge credibility to Goodlad and his organization globally. For him to be able to say, hey, well, BYU's on board with what I'm doing, I mean, that's absolutely irresponsible to lend credibility to his godless organization. Another godless organization, UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. This is the organization that's all about the education of the world. They promote the sustainability agenda, which at its core is global Marxism. Shared resources. You don't really own your own property. So in 1984, UNESCO published a methodological guide to the application of the notion of Common Core in the training of various categories of educational personnel. The focus was on making teachers change agents. I don't think, it's probably somewhat significant, if coincidental, that the year this happened was 1984. In 2004, UNESCO got Bill Gates to sign a contract with him to create a global education system. Gates immediately started pumping a lot of money into Common Core to bring all the states in line with each other, because you can't have a global system when all the states in America are on different pages. Okay, now in the interest of time, I am going to direct you to a great presentation on Common Core, and I'm not going to talk a whole lot more about it. But for anyone living under the delusion that Common Core was state-led, go to YouTube, look up this presentation by Dr. Duke Pesta. It's called Common Core from Farce to Failure. And he'll step you through the big players like David Coleman, the architect of Common Core, Bill Gates, the funder of Common Core, Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education under Obama, and his desire to see schools open around the clock and more. It's an hour and 20 minutes, and it's powerful. He's done over 400 presentations around the country on Common Core. This is the one to watch. One thing I do want to mention that he talks about is Pearson Publishing. Pearson is the 800-pound gorilla in the textbook publishing arena. And it's a lot more broad than just textbooks. They own 40% of the testing market, which is triple their nearest competitor. They have tests for students, tests for teachers. They have psychological tests. You name it, if it's a test, they're involved in it. They're experts in psychological testing. Pearson was involved very early on in the creation of Common Core and has received funding from Bill Gates and the federal government, even though they're not a nonprofit organization. They were thrilled to be involved early with Common Core because it meant they could produce the curriculum before anybody else. So there were just a few big players that produced all this curriculum for Common Core that when it was rushed on the states, oh, we're adopting Common Core. Oh, we're going to do it for next year. We've got to have curriculum. Who can we turn to? Who's going to save us? Oh, Pearson. They did it. They created this awesome stuff for us somehow in a nick of time, since they were involved early with it. What they've done is they've basically edged out hundreds of small publishers, either bought them up or just pushed them right out of the market. They own 80% of the American textbook market. 92% of Common Core textbooks are Pearson. And 100% of the Canadian market is Pearson. That's monopoly power. Remember this the next time teachers say they have control over their curriculum. Most of them are buying material from the same thinkers right here. Now, how many of you have heard of Project Veritas? A couple of you. Okay, so remember the Planned Parenthood sting videos, the undercover videos where they went in and got these Planned Parenthood people to, arrange for selling baby body parts? So Project Veritas has done the same thing with textbook publishers. And if we have time after my presentation, I'll play a short video clip. But basically, they went in and showed that Pearson is intentionally writing anti-Christian, pro-Islam textbooks and a whole host of other things, anti-Second Amendment. It's all being pushed into the textbooks. And just yesterday, somebody told me about a textbook that her child had at Lone Peak High School 5 years ago that basically said that it was the great relationship between Bill Clinton and Gorbachev that brought down the Berlin Wall. That surprised me. I did not know that, since I kind of remember when the Berlin Wall came down, and I don't remember Bill Clinton being involved. Over the years, we've seen a lot of federal programs trying to raise the effectiveness of our education system. Outcome-based education, Goals 2000, No Child Left Behind, Common Core, and the Every Student Succeeds Act. So when ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, passed last December, Arne Duncan, Secretary of Education, was quoted as saying, "I'm stunned at how much better it ended up than either House or Senate bill going into conference. I had a Democratic congressman say to me, 'It's a miracle. He's literally never seen anything like it.' If you look at the substance of what is there, embedded in the law are the values that we've promoted and proposed forever. The core of our agenda from day one. That's all in there. Early childhood, high standards, Common Core." It gets better. We were intentionally quiet on the bill. They asked us specifically not to praise it and to let it get through. There's a shocker for you. And so we went into radio silence and then talked about it after the fact. Our goal was to get this bill passed, intentionally silent on the many, many good aspects of the bill. We were very strategically quiet on good stuff. What changed from No Child Left Behind? This was the bill to replace No Child Left Behind. So it got rid of annual yearly progress, which was what kind of caused a lot of states to lower their standards 12 years ago, because they had to show that every year they were making annual yearly progress. So what happens once you hit 100%? The states were going, this is not a good deal. How'd this get done to us? So they dropped their standards, a lot of them, as a natural result of federal improvement programs, and we wound up with annual yearly progress that actually hurt some of the education system. But under ESSA, we have the same basic federal controls. Over to the side, there's a table. I don't have a lot of handouts, but there are some comparisons between ESSA and No Child Left Behind if you want to get one. There's also some Stop Common Core signs after the presentation. If you want one, go pick one up. I don't want them in my garage anymore. and it'd be a lot better and nicer on your lawn. So, same controls. We didn't get rid of any of the federal controls. Except now what we have in ESSA is the Federal Secretary of Education has veto power over our state plans. So that was a big improvement for local control. Now we give the feds veto power over what we're doing, right? We also get ombudsmen in private schools. So up till now, private schools could do whatever they wanted. But now the government said, we want to make sure that private schools are having every student succeed. So we're going to put ombudsmen in those schools. That's another thumbs up, right? And, we want family education plans because we know how important the parent is to the success of a child in education. So let's have family education plans. And in the draft implementation, which is online, from the Department of Health and Human Services, 8 times it talks about parenting interventions. It also talks about starting tracking of children prenatally. How many of you are excited about that one? Invite the government in. I just had my ultrasound. Come on in, data track me and my child. So in Utah, only Senator Hatch voted for this beast out of our federal delegation. And Governor Herbert was actually a vocal proponent of the bill as well, which kind of baffles me. It's an anti-family, anti-local control bill and gives new powers to the feds, massive overreach, but maybe he didn't even read it. So, I assume everyone here is familiar with the transgender dictate. I'm not going to say a lot about this. Basically, the feds have mandated nobody's allowed to do what they might want to do locally to meet their own local needs. The feds are going to dictate what this policy is. What's interesting, and I didn't know this until several days ago, was that the week after this transgender bill, when everyone was still talking about it, the Obama administration, Department of Health and Human Services, announced that all hospitals receiving Medicare, Medicaid taxpayer dollars must perform sex change operations or lose their federal funding. So this particularly hits at religious hospitals that accept Medicare, Medicaid for patients of that type, because unless they go against their moral standards, they basically lose all the opportunity to bring in that additional work, which would dramatically cut their operations. So how do we respond to these dictates and infringements on our standards and liberty? Number one, the assault on religious freedom and conscience have to stop. This is a tough battle in today's world and requires statesmen who stand by principle, not compromisers who engage in political expediency. Number two, the answer is really local control. We can't allow anybody above the local level, whatever the most appropriate local level for a policy is, to set those standards. Maybe it'll work for someone somewhere, but it's not going to work for everyone everywhere. And there are very good reasons that the framers erected walls of separation, like the 9th and 10th Amendments, from the federal government pushing its nose into every issue. So I want to talk really briefly about religious freedom and the assault that it's under. Several years ago, I remember David Barton being on Glenn Beck's show and saying that at the time Jefferson was president and wrote his famous letter to the Danbury Baptists about the wall of separation, the 2 states actually had state religions at that time. I'd never heard that. And so I went home and I started to research it. And I wrote about it on my Utah's Republic website. You can find an article I've titled Jefferson's Jericho Wall of Separation, if you want to Google that. And just recently I finished reading Mike Lee's excellent book, Our Lost Constitution, The Willful Subversion of America's Founding Document. Excellent book, really cool stories in it. Totally recommend that. And in that, he actually has a chapter that talks about exactly what I wrote, and I'm going to share that with you. So we've all probably heard, churches can't get involved in politics because of the wall of separation clause. And I'm sure you know there's no such thing in the Constitution. So here's the short version of the story. Jefferson had some friends in Danbury, Connecticut, who wrote to him for assistance because they wanted to move religious freedom in their state from a favor granted by government to an inalienable right. They weren't looking for specific action or legislation from Jefferson, but just asked him for hopeful expressions that would have a positive effect on efforts to recognize this. So Jefferson wrote back a very kindly worded letter, you can find all of this online, and shared in their sentiment, but stated he was unable to do this because the effect of the Constitution was to bar the national officials from interfering with religious issues, which were to be handled at the state level. The Constitution created a wall of separation for him, which precluded him from doing anything religious. Now, how do we know that Jefferson, who wrote the letter, recognized that churches had speech rights and could influence the government, but that the federal government was barred from any actions regarding religion? When he was the governor of Virginia, he called for a day of thanksgiving and prayer. Don't know if you knew that. And at the time, Massachusetts and Connecticut, as I mentioned, had state religions, state-sanctioned religions. And he saw no problem with these things, even as president. He didn't get involved because there was a wall of separation for federal officials from interfering with the state. So, it wasn't until 1818 that Connecticut dropped its state religion, and Massachusetts was 1833. And let's just look at the language in the Massachusetts Constitution. This is pretty amazing. Massachusetts actually taxed the people. Let me read this. As the happiness of a people and the good order and preservation of civil government essentially depend upon piety, religion, and morality, therefore, to promote the happiness, the people of this Commonwealth have a right to invest their legislature with power for the institution of the public worship of God. And the people of this Commonwealth have also a right to and do invest their legislature with authority to enjoin upon all the subject and attendance upon the instructions of the public teachers aforesaid. And all monies paid by the subject to the support of public worship be paid toward the support of the teacher or teachers of the parish or precinct in which the said monies are raised. That's amazing. I mean, so basically, we're going to tax the people and fund religious instruction in our state because, and we're going to encourage you to go to church. And we know that's going to increase the happiness of the people and have a positive effect on all of our society. Anybody learn this in school? No hands. I can't believe it. Wonder why we aren't taught this in school anymore. Wrong agenda. John Adams said, "Statesmen, my dear sir, may plan and speculate for liberty, but it is religion and morality alone which can establish the principles upon which freedom can securely stand." The purpose of our republic is to allow for people to self-govern. And the only way you can self-govern is if there's a fixed, established set of principles that are shared among society. So without a belief in absolute truth from a moral and religious framework of Judeo-Christian values, we devolve into moral relativity. So knowing that religion and morality are the core components of freedom, what do we find the world under the influence of the beast doing to believers? Silencing them, destroying religious freedom, forcing perversions of their beliefs upon them, seeking to stomp out the First Amendment, violating rights of speech, declaring secular atheistic religion as the new state religion and litmus test that the 6th article of the Convention or Constitution was supposed to forbid. Again, Elder Neal Maxwell, 40 years ago, this new irreligious imperialism seeks to disallow certain opinions simply because those opinions grow out of religious convictions. That's 40 years more of degeneration. So how do we restore religious freedom? Stand for something. You got to learn the true principles of freedom and then promote them. Do you know your legislators? Do they know you by name? Get their cell phone numbers and email addresses and use them. They're all online. le.utah.gov. Go there, find out who your legislators are, and make your voice heard. Get on a first-name basis with them. And only vote for principled candidates. So, let's move toward local control with a little groundwork. What is freedom? What does that mean to you and other people? To some, it is freedom of choice. Freedom to move. Freedom to think. Freedom to succeed. Freedom to fail. And to others, freedom from failure. Freedom from choices. Freedom from responsibility. Freedom from fear. Everyone says they're for freedom, except in areas they feel really strongly about that have to be controlled by the state. Because as long as they can get a majority to go along with them and their reasons, that's okay. And they just take a little slice of that pie of freedom away from us because they have justified what their little pet anti-freedom project is. Slice after slice of our freedoms get whittled away by this ravenous beast who wants the whole pie. It's a very tasty pie. And when it's all gone, the beast is probably going to get upset and start killing people because it's a hungry beast. And when we seek freedom from failure, fear, choices, accountability, we're really saying to the government, please take away my agency and freedom because it's too much of a burden on me. Tell me what to do, how to do it, where to do it, when to do it, and for heaven's sake, make it succeed. Or at least, if it doesn't, take from those who do succeed and give some to me because, I've got to be compensated for trying and failing. So let's define freedom. Here's one simple set of principles that we can operate from. Freedom is the ability to exercise your will within your rights without the threat of force from anyone. No one can claim rights over you or your children without violating your rights. You own yourself and the things you produce. Oddly enough, sometimes the very people who say they understand the definition of freedom create slavery for themselves and others. How many choose safety over freedom, which our founding fathers tried to give us, and use government force to help a certain class of society or use corruption as a tool to become more wealthy and exacerbate the problems? So why are some people afraid of freedom? They're taught to obey authority figures. That happens at a very early age. We're told to enjoy our rulers. Choices create consequences. We have no one to blame if we're truly free. It's risky. We crave safety, and for ourselves and others. Because if we let them have freedom, what are they going to do with it? We have to have good intention laws, right? Those who seek power over others often do it in the name of good intentions. This is what Daniel Webster, a founding father, had to say. Good intentions will always be pleaded for every assumption of authority. It's hardly too strong to say that the Constitution was made to guard the people against the dangers of good intentions. There are men in all ages who mean to govern well, but they mean to govern. They promise to be good masters, but they mean to be masters. So what happens when an individual is dissatisfied with the way somebody else is behaving? Do they step back and say they have their freedom and they reflect on the proper role of government and take what legitimate actions they might take, or do they seek to use the power of the state to take action? By what right? If you don't have the ability to do it yourself, you don't have the ability to delegate or assign that function to government. So StatISM. This is a term that I had never heard as a youth. I don't even remember the first time I heard this, maybe a few years ago. I didn't understand any of these things until I started to study the Constitution and principles of freedom. So if you find yourself in a similar situation to where I was a few years ago, just start. There's some great resources out there. And Mike Lee's book that I mentioned is a good one. There's a lot. So StatISM, or StatISM, is the belief that state force should be used for economic or social policy. And one who believes in using physical state force is called a statist. So it's basically the use of power to control what you can't control and do with yourself and your property. What you cannot do. So the great American experiment of self-government was in freedom. And our founders tried to do everything possible to restrict the government from being able to be involved in our lives. They tried to make it so that the only time government was involved was when we were violating somebody else's rights. And some people deem you incapable of taking care of yourself. So they enlist government to take the burden on itself and relieve you of that duty. Make sure your needs are met. Today, a lot of textbooks in school are filled with Keynesian economics and the virtues of big government. And so the rising generation has largely been indoctrinated in government solving problems, which is evidenced by the presidential campaign of Bernie Sanders. The natural outcome for this pattern is more rules and regulations to control our lives until the day comes that the government says, we just can't have a society where people are free to make bad decisions. We're going to need to silence the dissenters for good, then provide for those who accept our benevolent rule. A simple study of the history of communism shows that this is true. And when it happens on a worldwide basis, that's the point of maximum power for the beast. It is worldwide, global, totalitarian government, in my opinion. So what does it look like when an educational statist speaks out? They defend the status quo. Everything's fine, just the way it is. They support the government public education system at all costs. There's nothing public about public education except for the public paying for it. The government sets the rules and the local families are left out. They personally attack and lie about people who question them. He's got an agenda. He's just a bully. They say parents aren't trained to teach their children unless they went through state training. That's completely true. California, you have to be a state licensed teacher to homeschool. I believe that's still the case. And let's force everyone for their own good to attend public schools for the good of society. That's compulsory education laws. So who are the extremists? Is it the media and those in government, or the ones that they say are, those of us trying to pull back on the reins of government, slow it down instead of letting them, beat it to ever faster speeds as they approach the cliff? Our founding principles have long been forgotten and erased from textbooks. People don't understand the principles of freedom anymore and generally lack their own core principles for the simple reason that it's painful to wrestle with things that are contrary to what you've grown up being taught and what society now considers tradition and established procedure. For example, support of compulsory education is the position of people who either don't value freedom and self-government or have never wrestled with it or have never studied its effects, or they simply believe in StatISM. When we tell others how to exercise their agency through the use of state force, aren't we in effect saying that we see a mote in their eye when there's a beam in our own? We're right, you're wrong. Nobody wants to be told what to do. In our family, we've been watching the original Star Trek series lately. I'm putting in a plug for the original series. How many of you remember watching Star Trek? All right, good, a few more hands. You remember the Prime Directive, the non-interference policy. They show up at a planet that's not as advanced as them. They can't interfere. They can't tell them, hey, we're going to make you technologically advanced. We're going to change your culture to what we think is better for you. I think we need to adopt a little more of the Prime Directive in our education system today. A little more freedom. Okay. Utah promises a free, this is written into our state constitution, we're promised a free education for all children. And you have to partake of it because it's compulsory. Free, but you have to take it. So, if you're not satisfied with what the state is teaching your child, what options do you have for a free education? Is that free? It's not free. Sure, you can pay for private school or homeschooling, but by the compulsory education laws as well, the state is saying, we know best. We're telling you, we've already studied this out. We know how to teach your child what's best for your child. That's why we're going to force you to partake of this system. So you may think, I want to do something different with my child, but if you want the free option, no, we know what it is. It's right here in our schools, our government paid for, funded, and operated schools. So it's free education as the state determines and enforces it. During the last legislative session, there was a bill, SB 45. Al Jackson, a senator from Alpine Highland area, ran this bill for us. And basically, it was to eliminate the criminal penalty on parents if their child was truant. And they were charged with educational neglect. You should have seen the educators that showed up from around the state. Oh, we can't have this. Oh, you can't take away this criminal penalty. Oh, we could have parents that, flout the law, that don't bring their kids to school. We've got kids that absolutely have to come to school from these parents that would not bring them otherwise. And, honestly, there are some dire circumstances. I get that. I totally believe there are many kids in this state whose parents don't care at all about their education. I get that. But why are we using state force to bring them to school instead of trying to persuade them and figure out how we can help this family in other ways? I mean, we've got tons of social workers. There's tons of, Utah is the most charitable state in the country. We give. We spend time trying to help people. And we should be looking for alternatives in the ways that we approach this. How many of you have seen Ben Carson's story, Gifted Hands, the movie? Okay, quite a few of you. That's an incredible movie. His mom couldn't read, and Ben Carson didn't know that. And she was doing janitorial work, basically maid service for other people. And it's just an awesome movie. It's called Gifted Hands. Totally worth watching over and over. So Dr. Carson's story is just this incredible story. His mom was working for this very wealthy individual that had a huge library. She asked him if he'd read all these books, and he said, yeah. And she went home, and her two sons are watching TV. She shuts the TV off and says, you two don't get any more TV until you go to the library. And you're going to read 2 books a week and write me reports. And there was weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, and they were so upset by this. And, they were basically the dumbest kids in their classes. And Ben Carson goes on to graduate with honors, graduate from Yale, and become the world's most famous brain surgeon. Because his mom said, shut the TV off, you're going to go and read. And I think if we have some of these homes in Utah, let's give them a copy of this video and try and use that to persuade. Numerous studies might be done that talk about the problems of compulsory education, or stories. I just want to share one that I heard, and I only talked to this family this week. There was a radio show in southern Utah that aired. You remember Kate Daly? She spoke here a few months ago. I caught one of her podcasts a month or something ago, and she interviewed a teacher that had quit the system in southern Utah named Neal Maxwell. And on her show, he was talking about how he'd quit over Common Core and some things. And he shared this story about this mother whose daughter was extremely ill. And she had taken her daughter to numerous doctors, had all the receipts and everything. And taking her daughter to school, her daughter was constantly sick. And the school kept threatening, and she was trying to get a 504 put in place so that they could customize and tailor the education for her daughter. And the principal was not cooperating very well. And so she invited the school district superintendent to come with her to one of these meetings. And she now thinks that was a mistake because the superintendent helped make that happen. And this was at the end of her daughter's 2nd grade year. And in June, this time of year, she got a letter from the school after school was out telling her that she had been committing educational neglect against her child for 3 years, kindergarten through 2nd grade. And she thought, what in the world is this? We have a 504 in place, we've been doing all this stuff, and she was brought to court where she got a public defender, and the public defender basically said to her, look, all they're asking you to do is, it was, I can't remember now. I'll have to put part 2 on my website. they wanted her to do something. And she said, okay, if that's what I have to do. So she went ahead and did this. Well, next thing she knows, she's in this cycle with the juvenile court system, DCFS court system, and basically they kept throwing things at her over and over again. She went through 5 public defenders, 3.5 years of torment. And it turns out that her daughter, who they thought was just being educationally neglected, had H. pylori infection in her stomach. And when they finally saw the pictures, they said her stomach looked like the body of a tiger with stripes all through it from this very painful infection. The principal never tried to work with her, basically said, you know what, she thinks that because she'd invited the superintendent to that meeting that the principal was upset with her and just said, I'm going to file this, charge against you, and because you had your daughter miss so much school, which in Utah is 10 days total during the year. 5 days and 5 days. I can't remember exactly how it works, but basically 10 days. You can have your child get charges, and you get a misdemeanor, be put in jail. So we tried to get this resolved this year in the legislative session, but all these educators showed up to fight it. So what are the costs of a free education? You pay for it, even if you don't use it. You're told what to learn. You're told who will teach it to you. You have no control over the curriculum or standards. You're told what classes someone else has decided are most important for you. And teachers are made authority figures to the exclusion of parents. And I just want to comment on this last point. How many of you have ever had your child come home and say, that's not how my teacher told me to do it? Happens all the time. Why does that happen? Because when we send our kids to school, we say, now you listen to your teacher. And by doing that, we give up some of our authority. And they go to school, and whatever that teacher says, they absorb, because my parents, who I trust, told me to listen to my teacher. So we're setting expectations. What we should be doing is saying, now look, you're going to go to school today, and you listen close to what your teacher says, and you come tell me anything that sounds funny. Anything that doesn't resonate with what we've talked about here at home, let's talk about it when you come home so that we can maintain that authority. Because the national agenda is to drive wedges between parents and children. And for example, the math, Common Core math, used to be investigations math, which is what I started off fighting 10, 12 years ago. These things are crazy to the point that parents cannot help their kids with their math when they bring it home. So it reinforces, and I totally think this is part of the agenda, is it reinforces for that child that my parents just don't know how to do this stuff. I need to go back to my teacher because they're the ones that understand how it works. And really what we need to be able to do is get our kids on programs that we can improve our relationship and teaching with them. This is also a reason that SAGE test bars parents and teachers from seeing the test questions. They isolate the child and let the professionals writing the tests have direct one-on-one solitary contact with our children. How many of you are aware about the abortion question that just hit the news yesterday? Okay, I'll talk about that after my presentation, but that's just another example of the type of indoctrination that can take place in the schools. Okay, college and career ready. We've been told for 6 years that Common Core makes our children college and career ready. But what does it take for somebody to really be college and career ready? They say it's these standards that are going to step them through certain knowledge and certain things in order to get them college and career ready. So I think that a major purpose of education has to be geared toward preparing students to take personal responsibility and education into their own hands. Because that's what we do as adults, right? I'm not in school anymore. How do I learn? I'd better know how to learn. So, to be college and career ready to me means a person knows how to learn. A person loves to learn. A person is responsible for their learning. A person chooses to learn. They're not compelled. And this quote from Ron Paul says, there can be no extension of liberty without an accompanying extension of personal responsibility. So the more a person progresses through their education, through the system, the more freedom there should be to pursue their interests and the less structured learning there should be. So what does government do today? Treats adults as children who can't act for themselves by expanding its authority over people's lives. Compulsory education prepares people to accept life in a welfare state by telling them what to do and when to do it. It is at the core obedience training and something to squash out independent thinking and evaluation. So why is it that every time somebody gets in a position of authority, the natural state is to seek to force your good intention ideas on everyone else? We need more legislators who take the exact opposite approach and are geared on repealing laws to provide greater freedom to make local decisions, starting with the family and parental rights. Thomas Jefferson said, well, you've heard the phrase, if power corrupts, then absolute power corrupts absolutely. So as the central government increases its power, it's increasingly subject to corruption. Jefferson understood the beast well and knew how to defeat it, local control. He said, it's by dividing and subdividing that all will be done for the best. What has destroyed liberty and the rights of man in every government which has ever existed under the sun? The generalizing and concentrating all cares and powers into one body. We've got to fracture that. So, let me give you an example. Standards. Okay, we're told Common Core standards, Utah standards, California standards. Who is wise enough in government to know what every child needs? The trick question, and rhetorical. It's a struggle just to know what my 5 children need. And I'm sure those of you with children totally get that. They're all different. We have a state board of 15 people who are just like you and me. They got elected. That doesn't make them suddenly geniuses. The mantle of authority did not suddenly bestow wisdom and intelligence on what all the children in the state of Utah need. So, what's best for every student is to have people who are local to those children make the decisions about how they're going to be educated, because that's when parents have a lot more say in what's going on. They have closer access to the people who are in charge of the system, because it could be at your local school. You could have a school board at your local school, and they're your neighbors. And you talk with your neighbors and say, hey, you know what? This math program you guys put in that doesn't teach times tables anymore, I have a problem with that. Can we discuss that? I've got several other neighbors we'd like to come over. Tell me how that happens when somebody in Washington, D.C. is setting policy, or even the state capitol. It doesn't. I loved what Joel Wright happens to be the state school board member for a lot of this area, Cedar Hills, Alpine, American Fork, this general area. So he's one of those 15 people. And he was quoted in the Tribune recently, right after Governor Herbert said that he wanted to eliminate Common Core and have Utah-specific standards. And at the very next meeting of the state school board, they had this discussion, and Joel said, setting state standards, how does that make us as a state any different from the feds setting Common Core? We're still giving a top-down prescription for what local children need. So why are we doing that? I thought that was great of him to bring up. We should let schools and districts choose their own standards, assessments, and curriculum. And maybe we could have an anti-vendor bill to forbid Pearson. I don't know, just a thought. School teachers and officials always talk about how children have different learning styles. You've all heard this, right? This child learns better auditorily, and this one learns better by reading and whatever. So if they all have different learning styles, why can't we respect the choice of a parent to actually have a different learning experience for their children right inside their own public school? Why can't schools accommodate parents' wishes by actually having multiple curriculum? Hey, you want your kid on Common Core? That's fine. I would really like my kid on a more traditional program that when he comes home and has questions about his homework, I can work with him, because I like that kind of relationship with my kids to help them. So why can't we do that? Oh, we can't do that because professional collaboration. We need to talk together as teachers and have this collaborative experience. Well, excuse me, I thought we were all professionals, as teachers, so Can't you just collaborate on your ideas for how to get a certain concept across? If a student is struggling with that concept, you don't have to have the same curriculum, right? You could come there and say, hey, how do I teach division by fractions really effectively? And you could all talk about that. You don't have to say, hey, we're all on page 92 of this book, and we're going to force everybody in the school on the same book, or the district, or the state. I think it's demeaning to teachers when we say, hey, you're not intelligent enough to have a different curriculum from the teacher next door. So we should let parents be able to choose a certain track at school, I believe, especially since all of our children are supposedly guaranteed a constitutionally free public education. So why can't we choose what we want? All right. So restoring true local control. To me, this means several things have to be done. It starts in the home. State law says we have a fundamental liberty interest in the education of our children. So I think based on that, this has to become more than words. 2, drop federal funding. Ezra Taft Benson, former LDS prophet and U.S. Secretary of Education, gave a speech entitled The Proper Role of Government, and in it stated this simple principle. He said, no state or local government can accept funds from the federal and remain independent in performing its functions, nor can the citizens exercise their rights of self-government under such conditions. So if we take federal money, we're obligated to federal strings. We cannot do that any longer. We need to use state power to nullify illegal federal laws and keep tax monies in Utah. We need to push money to the lowest levels possible to begin with and let them purchase services from those above them. This will help us get to more appropriate funding levels and actual services needed. So budgets and spending, if they're local, there's going to be more eyeballs on that, so there's less waste. And if money is spent at a higher level, it's much more prone to waste because people say, well, let's just spend this and see what happens, and it's not really targeted. And we need to restore local taxation. Only when people set their own taxes and spend their own tax money is that money truly going to be spent wisely and for necessities, because they have a direct influence in what's happening. Every level taxation is removed from us introduces layers of waste. So, all that said, you have options as parents and grandparents in the education of your children. And I don't have time to go into a lot of depth on each of these, but I'm just going to mention a few. Sudbury schools. This is something that I found maybe 6 years ago, and I thought it was really strange, totally foreign to me. It was started in Connecticut about 50 years ago. There's no classes. Kids show up at this school, there's no classes. And the mixed ages of children mingling, seeking to learn things that they have an interest in. Older students helping younger students to learn. And the learning here is all self-learning. So what do you think the outcome of a school like this is? Public schools graduate so many kids, and I'll just tell you, of public education, 3% of children go on to become entrepreneurs who can take care of themselves without having a job for somebody else. Sudbury School, their graduates average 42% go on to become entrepreneurs because they figured it out on their own. They engaged in self-learning and had to be motivated to do the work. So 14 times increase. There's a lot of private schools around. There's religious, non-religious. If you find one with options you like better for your child, check it out. The American Family Education is a school that I recently learned about in Arizona. It's a low-cost private school. They have several schools in Arizona, but it's not a franchise. The owner just has this framework of how they operate, and kids only go to school Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 8 to noon. It's an LDS private school, but there's non-LDS that come there because it's basically general religious studies, and you basically get religion, math, history, science, and social studies during that block of 4 hours. And then all the rest of the week, those afternoons and Mondays and Fridays, you can come to the school and take electives. And you pay for it for people from the community who are an expert in their area to come in and teach. So they have paid teachers during those few morning blocks, and if that's all you want to do to get your kid a private education, you can do it. But if you want to participate in those other electives from real experts in the field, you can do it, and they just have a variety of classes. It's kind of cool. Next one, online schools. So there's a lot of online schools, and this is getting really interesting because, in fact, in this book I'm going to give out, The School Revolution by Ron Paul, he talks about how schools are now about 1/10 the cost of public education. And as more parents recognize that their children can get a better education online than in a public school, and it can align with your values better, there's going to be an exodus from public education into homeschool education with these kinds of opportunities. Dual enrollment. This is something that our family has done for several years. We didn't want to have our kids in Common Core math, so we said, you know what, you're going to go to school an hour late on math days, and we're going to schedule that as first period class for you. So you'll do math at home and then other classes at school. And then that kind of morphed into, you know what, you're going to do math at home, you're going to do science at home, you're going to do English at home. Go take sign language at the local school. And because that was offered there. And so we've done a variety of things with our kids. Dual enrollment is legal in Utah. Anywhere you can decide what classes you want to take at the public school, decide where else you want to get education for your children. And then homeschool, of course, is an option. And there's more. I'll just mention about homeschool. Some of the advantages: you can avoid indoctrination. You can avoid state threats. You can avoid psychological profiling and manipulation. So those are a few positives that you can have there. So homeschooling is a challenge, but it is the most flexible. And more offerings are coming. I mean, in the next few years, I'm really excited to see what happens. Now, if you haven't decided if homeschooling is right for you, I'd like you to go to this website address. This is, a few years ago, I started a nonprofit organization called Agency-Based Education that, you know, our mission is basically to oppose compulsory education. And on this particular page, I've got 3 videos from conferences. We do a conference every November. Anybody can come to them. It's on the website. And so on this site, I've got 3 past presentations. One from Gail Ruzicka, the president of Utah Eagle Forum. She talks about how she homeschooled her kids while they were at the Capitol. While she was up there, she homeschooled her, I don't know, 8 or 9 kids. I can't remember how many she has, but 12 kids homeschooled at the Capitol while she was engaged in political activism. Okay, that's pretty amazing. You can listen to her story. It's great. Connor Boyack did a presentation last year that's on this page called Passion-Based Education, which is kind of an unschooling approach to education where you don't have necessarily a set curriculum. You look at what your child's interests are and approach it from that direction. And Christian Chevrier, who gave a presentation a couple years ago, talks about a little bit more traditional approach to homeschooling. So you can go check those out and see what you think. So my presentation was Education and Freedom, or Dancing with the Scorpions. So last week, and I have absolutely no idea what I ate for dinner that night, but I had this weird dream. And I was in my childhood home, and I was going from one end of the house to the other. And there were these scorpions on the floor, and they were just following me wherever I went. And I wasn't afraid of them, but it was kind of annoying because it was like, I got to keep moving. And I'd go from one end of the house, and here they'd come scampering along, and I'd step over them, and I'd go to the other end of the house. And a lot of times I don't remember dreams when I wake up, but I remembered that one because I was like, that was a really strange dream. And then it hit me, and I was like, okay, I'll name these scorpions. Common Core, Pearson, SAGE testing, and it all fit for me. And so until the day that the beast starts putting dissenters to death, you still have power over what happens to you and your children. Things might come after you, but you are still in the driver's seat. You can choose what you're going to do. And I would just encourage you to fix principles of freedom in your mind. And when people tell you it's what your child needs or something like that, investigate it for yourself. If they say, oh, the reason a program failed is because, it was a poor implementation. We didn't fully execute the program. Don't believe them. That's a program that's never going to work. The simplest and closest solutions are always the ones that are the best ones. So scorpions might be dangerous, but you can pass them by. Don't let them get to you or your family. Use your God-given agency to protect your children and get them the best educational experience that you can and find the best solutions. Pretty soon a graduation certificate is going to be meaningless Right now, kids that are homeschooled, they don't get a high school diploma. They can just take the ACT or SAT, and now, since those have been aligned to Common Core, there's 2 competing tests, the Vector ARC and the CLT, Classical Learning Tests, that are coming out, and colleges are starting to accept those. So those are free of indoctrinating type questions and the Common Core methodology. So you can avoid the problems that are present in the public education system for your children, your grandchildren, and have none of the baggage. And that's not to say that public schools are all bad or anything of the nature. There's some great teachers, and I totally applaud what they've done. They are under an awful burden through the regulations and things that have been imposed on them, both from the federal government and our state legislature. And they need to be freed up from that in a big way so that they have much more freedom in the classroom, but a lot more interaction with you as a parent so that they can do what's really, truly best for your children. And with that, thank you. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. I'll take a couple questions in the few minutes we have left.
I didn't hear what you said, those issue options for the testing were.
The CLT, and you can go to cltexam.com. That's the website for it. And they have a practice exam on their website. It's a 2-hour online test. You can take it, your kids can take it, see what it's like. It's really cool. It uses like real essays from like C.S. Lewis, Locke, Montesquieu, so they read that, and then they answer questions about it. It's not some, oh, the pineapple ran down the hill and hit the apple. Not some goofy kind of stuff. So the other one is called the Vector ARC, A-R-C, and I don't know if that's vectorarc.com, but you can Google it. Yeah. Right now, I know on the CLT, it's mostly Christian-based colleges. I don't know that BYU has signed on to it yet, but I know I get emails from them, and every couple weeks they're like, oh, this university is signed up now. And so there's like a dozen or more, and they just came out. So it's over the next year, I bet they sign up quite a few. Yes, okay. First of all, let me give away this book. 30. Anybody have higher? So, all right. It looks like going once. 30, that's it? Really? That's pretty good. That's
I tried to buy some, so I didn't.
okay. All right, the book is yours. Congratulations. So, I'm going to have to work on it, I guess. Not enough. So, okay, what was the other question? Oh, the abortion thing. All right, so I did actually bring a slide of this to show you. So this is a question. There's a student, okay, let me tell you the story. Student in Stansbury Park by Tooele has a final exam at the end of the school year. 3 weeks before the final exam, he's taking a quiz in his biology class. And on that test, he sees this question. And he's like, this has nothing to do with anything we've learned about. This same exact question appears on his final exam, and he text messages his mom. And he's going to Stansbury High School, but he's also enrolled in the Utah Electronic High School. And so he takes classes online for English and one other class, 2 of them. And he sees this question, he's like, Mom, this abortion question is on the test again. She said, take a picture of the screen. And they went home, and he's like, what should we do? And she said, send it to Oak Norton, he'll post it online. And this is the question. John and his sister Brittany are high school students in a small town. Their mother Jill is 40 years old and has just learned she's pregnant with a child. Genetic testing indicates the child has Down syndrome. Their family doctors recommended Jill have an abortion. John and Brittany's mother and father have called the family together to discuss their options. Which of the following statements describes how the family should make this decision? Option 1, parents should wait till the baby is ready to be born, then redo the genetic test to see if the results have changed. Now, I'm not sure, but does that kind of imply like, 9 months minus a day, it looks like Down syndrome, I guess we should abort? I mean, what's going through this 10th grader's mind on a biology test, right? Let's jump to number 3. The doctor has more scientific knowledge. The parent should follow the advice of the doctor and have the abortion. 4, the parent should consider the wishes of the mother, since she'll carry the greatest responsibility for the child and do whatever she wants. 2, okay, this was the correct answer. The parent should consider many aspects of this decision, including religious beliefs, financial burden, the effect on other family members, the mother's health, the doctor's recommendation, and the life of the unborn child, and then make the best decision for everyone. Let's just figure it out as a community, you know? So we're going to welcome this child into our home option. It's not there, okay? So this is a prime example of indoctrination. Now here's the rest of the story. Posted this yesterday morning, went all over the state. It was really kind of fun to see the state office scramble as they were, blitzed by the media and school board members and the community. And so the story is the teacher had no idea whatsoever that this question was on the quiz or the final exam. And the administrator of the electronic high school has verified that, because what a lot of those teachers do is they have a test bank and they're just saying, hey, give me 10 questions for a quiz, give me 30 questions for the final exam. They don't even look at the questions. So surprise, new policies have been enacted. They will review all questions that are on an exam. They're going to review the entire test bank. Now, somebody contributed this question to the test bank. Somebody on Facebook did a little digging on Google and found that this question has appeared on other tests elsewhere in the country. So somebody may have plagiarized and just contributed it to this open source test bank that teachers contribute to. I don't know. We don't know the full investigation, but that is a prime example of why you might want to homeschool and keep your, and part of the other thing that has to come out of this is parents have to see every question their children are asked on a test. If they take a quiz or a test, it's got to come home to the family so you can look at it and say, you know what, we're going to talk about this question. Because even if your kid had a legitimate question they got wrong, you might have said, you know what, you missed this question on the circulatory system. Let me explain this to you. Let's have a conversation and learn something together. So you have an opportunity to help your child reinforce a true concept. And so SAGE tests have got to completely go, because teachers can't even see them. Parents can't see them. They're written by people who knows what their values are and things, and they're completely hidden. So yes. Yes. Man, why didn't I say that? You can opt out of SAGE tests, thanks to Aaron Osmond's bill that we got through a couple years ago. So everybody should opt their kids and grandkids out, and maybe your neighbor's kids. Send notes for them too. They can use pencil and paper tests. Teacher. If enough kids opt out, it will collapse the system, and it's growing every year. Last year, it was over 3% of Utahns. It was like 39,000 kids opted out, something like that. The year before, it was like 1%, so it's growing. Yes. Yes. Yeah, there's actually national sexuality standards that were, surprise, written by Planned Parenthood. It's the Common Core Health Sex Ed program. And those standards haven't been enacted in Utah, but Representative Brian King in Utah is working hard to make sure they do. Last session, he ran a sexuality bill. Utah has the lowest rate of teen pregnancy in the country because we have an abstinence-only policy. That's all we teach. So with that kind of track record, that we're the lowest, why would we change to, let's introduce kids to condoms and all these other things when we're already the most successful state in the country? Don't quite get that, but it's part of the agenda, so you learned about that tonight. Any other questions? Yeah. Collapsing, public education is going to collapse on its own. It is the train hurtling toward the side of the cliff, and it's going to collapse under its own weight, its own arrogance. It's like in Ron Paul's book, he actually talks about, he thinks within 5 years, we're going to start seeing more people leaving public schools than going there, because the options are going to be so prevalent. Right now, you can be at home and take a class from MIT. It's all online. MIT, Stanford, Yale. They're putting all their top-notch lectures online. Why would you sit in front of a high school class with kids that don't want to be there goofing around when you can be like, You know what, I'm really into this molecular biology. I think I'll just take it from MIT. Why would you put yourself through the brain damage of being in public schools when you have that kind of option? So I think it's headed there. They don't recognize it, but when the funding starts disappearing, and everybody's like, hey, there's more homeschoolers in the state than public school, that'll change.
I've noticed that public schools are starting online programs.
Yeah.
I'm sure they see the writing on the wall.
Yeah, there is some of that, for sure. This Utah Education Network, that's an online Utah public school.
Do you think that they'll outlaw homeschooling?
Oh, will they outlaw homeschool? That's the question. I absolutely believe that day will come, that they'll say, you can't teach your kids because you're not qualified, you're not a teacher. What do you know? You're trying to give them religious beliefs? Are you crazy? That's not part of their agenda. So unless we actively elect good people who will protect us, who will fight the federal beast and say, no, that's not going to happen in Utah. We are going to protect homeschoolers. Like for a long time, the homeschool community has not been politically active in these issues because they think, oh, I homeschool. I can just pull back and isolate and not be involved in fighting Common Core and things. Well, it's coming. We just saw ESSA. They want a home education plan. They want to know what's going on in your home with parenting interventions. So unless we actively engage the homeschool movement as well, and they recognize, hey, they're coming after me. It's like that story, you've probably all seen this, first they came for the Jews, then they came for the Catholics, and by the time they got to me, there was no one left to defend myself. Some German minister talking about what was going on in Hitler's Germany. And, the homeschoolers are kind of like that last line, like, hey, we're protected, and they have to realize they're not. It will come and get them as well. Sherilyn.
Yeah, in your network, going to this gender issue and of course the bathroom issue, are you getting a lot of more concern from parents?
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely a movement over the gender issues. Parents are concerned. I don't remember all of the statistics, but homeschooling is growing by double digits in Utah. Davis County was the largest increase last year. I don't know if you remember, but I want to say it was like a 41% increase in homeschoolers in their school district area.